Thank you. I'm very happy to be publishing this book. It's been a while since Yoknapatawpha had a new hardcover book, and this is a very exciting day for me. My association with the Ole Miss Journalism School started with Will Norton in 1979 when Willie Morris came to teach here. And he first started off in the English department, but was not perfectly acclimated or happy with the English department. So Will welcomed him over to the journalism school, and I went over to thank Will, and he and I shook hands, and we looked at each other, and at that moment we knew that we had just taken joint custody of Willie Morris. So we're fellow custodians, and well, this book is being published in association with the Meek School of Journalism, and I appreciate this opportunity. I've learned a lot about journalism that I didn't know at Ole Miss. For one thing, it has such a beautiful hands-on teaching system that the students are picked out for their ability, and then they are carefully shepherded through the program, and they are groomed, and when they are released into the world, they are ready to make their contribution, and the school stays after them. And I didn't get that experience in my graduate experience. However, I didn't just get a PhD from Ole Miss. I met my wife, Deanie. And to that extent, I feel that my title is not PhD, but Dean Wells. And so, from one dean to another, I'd like to introduce Will Norton.
Before I introduce our guest speaker today, I'd like to read a letter from one of his former students, a letter from Greg Brock. Greg is the senior editor for standards at the New York Times, and Greg sent me a letter this morning that he wanted to make sure that I read today. Dear Dr. Farrar, I so wish I could be there today to celebrate the publication of Powerhouse and to thank you for all you did for me and for Ole Miss lo those many years ago. I will resist thinking in terms of decades, and yet it seems more appropriate that I am not there today. That is because I am exactly where you wanted me to be and all of your students to be, out in the world trying to maintain and improve the ideals of journalism you first instilled in us. About the time you were getting ready for your event today, I will be going to our front page news meeting. If I am lucky, I will make some small contribution that will make the Times better tomorrow, or at least prevent it from being worse. Being a journalist is all I know how to do, so trying to do good journalism is the only way I know to repay you for all you have done. Whatever today and future days bring, I will never forget those formative days and years when you set me on my way. One of the most important things you did was to make me believe in myself, to believe that I would and could make my way in the world of journalism. I did not realize it then, but now I do. That was a gift beyond measure. And I think Ron Farrar has had that kind of impact on a lot of people. And so it's really great for us to be able to have him here today to talk about this book. Before I even say anything more, I want to say just a few things, or read a few things from his daughter's, if I can find it here. I got so emotional reading the letter. His daughter wrote an article for us for our alumni news. Janet Worthington is a prize-winning science writer, and she wrote a book that was on the bestseller list for a long time with a topic that you wouldn't think would normally be on the bestseller list. She wrote about the prostate. And it was on the New York Times bestseller for months and months. Here's what Janet said in her Meek School magazine article. Dad taught me how to write, how to think and approach a story. In high school, when my classmates were using flowery language and passive voice, my papers cut right through the crap and got to the heart of the story. I was the only one in AP English to have a lead. My parents had great parties for faculty and students. There was always a keg, always lots of food. Dad had a special soft spot for foreign students. He worried about them being so far away from home, and so every single Thanksgiving for as long as I can remember, we always had at least 2 or 3 students, usually from Taiwan or China, who had nowhere else to go, who got to stuff themselves with my mom's good cooking. Dad is not the most patient man. Once for weeks, every few days, the phone would ring in the wee hours that, oh God, somebody's died time of the night. Nobody was there. The head of the phone company, Mr. X, assured Dad that this was just a testing of the phone lines, and it would stop. When it happened again, Dad called him in the middle of the night. This is Ron Farrar. The line testing didn't stop. It never happened again. Another time, during one of countless interminable faculty meetings that he has sat through in his lifetime, a professor was pitching a fit about unauthorized use of a copy machine, winding up to a big finish. The people for which it was put here, the man said. There was dead silence for a minute, and then Dad said, "For whom?" 8 of Dad's students have gone on to win Pulitzer Prizes, but one of the things Dad is proudest of as a teacher is that nobody ever knew whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. He didn't think it was anybody's business. I know it grieves him to say how biased journalism has become. To Dad, opinion is one thing and reporting is another. My father happens to share an honor with legendary coach Bear Bryant. Both are in the Fordyce High School Hall of Fame. Bryant got his football scholarship to the University of Alabama in 1931, before Dad was born. However, we do have a family connection. My grandmother once hit Bear Bryant with her car. Dad received this honor 2 years ago, not hitting the car, but the Hall of Fame. The man who introduced him kind of rambled and didn't speak into the microphone very well, and the crowd of several hundred people was the least bit rude, talking, going back for seconds on the fried chicken, etc. Then Dad got up to accept the award, and within a few minutes, the room was silent. All those years of giving lectures and leading discussions paid off. He owned the room. Ron Farrar is a great educator and a great evaluator of talent, an enthusiastic and committed teacher, and someone who knows how to identify those in need. I know of no journalism faculty member who has accomplished more as a published scholar, journalism administrator, graduate administrator, and teacher. I know of no such person who also has raised an incredibly accomplished children and done more for others than Ron Farrar. My best example, in a moment of desperation, when someone in our family was very ill, I mentioned it to Ron Farrar in an email message. Within minutes, he had sent an email to his son-in-law and asked him to arrange an appointment at the family rate. And within months, the member of our family who was so sick had then been restored to health. If only for that act of kindness, I would tell you how much I think of Ron Farrar. However, there have been countless times I've seen him in combat that was damaging to him but vital for others. The Meek School of Journalism and New Media would not be where it is today if it were not for this Hall of Famer from Fordyce, Arkansas. Please welcome Dr. Ron Farrar.
Oh, good job. Oh, thank you. Up here? Stand up here? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I didn't know quite what to expect, so I made some notes, but I promise not to read this. And I appreciate that introduction, right before while he was in the Senate, Mr. Lyndon Johnson was introduced that way, and he said he wished his mom and daddy could have been there. His mama would have been proud of all those nice things that were said, and his daddy would have believed them. So this has been a wonderful homecoming. He mentioned my family. He mentioned my son Bradley, who is a lawyer, and back in Columbia, South Carolina, and an author, and also Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine Corps. He just got back from a month in Germany with the JAG Eurocom. But when he was here, he wore a Cub Scout uniform, and he went to, was it Bramlett Elementary School? Yes. And he's got two of his daughters, Elizabeth and Caroline, here. My daughter Janet, who was mentioned, when she was here, my memories of her go back to her wearing a hoop skirt and at the Cedar Oak, was it the Pilgrimage? And she would play the organ for hours while people passed through. And the first year that they had her to do that, her feet wouldn't reach the pedals, so she got one of her buddies to get down on her knees and pump the organ while Janet played the keyboard. Janet has published more books than her father. It was Janet, by the way, who gave us the title for this book. We had talked about it. I spent some time talking with James Autry, who was president of Meredith Magazine, an Ole Miss alum, very fine alum from here, and we talked about it for a long time, and the best we could come up with for the journalism school was incubator, because that's what we thought it did. And I mentioned this to Janet and told her what was in the book, and she wasted no time in telling me that was lame. And so and within 5 minutes she came up with Powerhouse, and I think she nailed it. Thank heaven she did. I hope I conveyed or tried to convey in the book something of the mystical feeling people have for this place. It's very difficult, but I guess the best that I heard was from H.L. Doc Stevenson, who was, when we knew him, he was editor-in-chief of United Press International. And this was during the Vietnam War, and UPI was a worthy competitor to the AP. We invited him to talk to a class. When he came in, he had been in Saigon with that bureau for a week, and he was ready to unwind. And so he started pouring himself stiff drinks at my house, and after about the fourth one, he raised his voice and he said, "God, it's great to be back in Mississippi, drinking mash and talking trash." And, you know, we don't drink that much mash, at least we don't, or even talk that much trash. But like him, it is great to be back here, and we felt very welcome here. It's been a wonderful, wonderful homecoming. Some years ago, Ed Meek and Will Norton came at me with a proposal that I write this history of the journalism program at Ole Miss. And I protested several lines of argument. I said, first place, I'm sure you've got people on your own faculty who could do a better job and wouldn't have to do the travel. And he said, well, we do have people, but we need someone with perspective. And that means if you just live long enough, they tell you you've got perspective. But and I also argued that in any history of the journalism program at Ole Miss, the two of the big stars of the program were going to be Will Norton and Ed Meek. And they dispelled this notion very quickly. They said, no, the stars of this story will be the kids who came through this program and the faculty members who honed their skills. it turned out after I got into it that they were right about that. I also said, I can't believe that there would be enough interest to justify a whole book about a fairly small professional program at one Southern university. And they said, don't worry, there's more to this story, you'll find out, than you think. And they were right about that too. So they gave me a graduate assistant, a young man named Jace Ponder, bright kid, and access, and I started in. It took a while, lots of trips down the road between Columbia, South Carolina, and Oxford. But it was a fascinating journey, and the research would not have amounted to much had it not been for a lot of help I got. Everybody, virtually everybody that I asked cooperated, answered my questions. In fact, we would talk for a long time, and then when we finished, they say, well, what you really ought to do is talk to so-and-so, and then that, this. So it took a while. But perhaps the biggest source of support for me was, in addition to Jace and what he dug up in the journalism school, the files of Dr. Jerry Hoare. Jerry had been with the program almost since its very beginning, and Jerry kept everything. I mean, he kept it all. And this is back in the days before there was much email. And email messages are, they're finding out in Washington, sometimes difficult to recover. But we had Jerry had the documents, and he shared them. I'm still not sure Jerry showed me everything in his files, but he showed me enough, and I couldn't have gotten it done without that. Another person of great help is someone I'm sure you know is Elizabeth Shriver. Liz Shriver didn't have documents, but she had memories, and she goes back to the very beginning of the program. And we had many very convivial conversations, and she was an enormous bit of help. A lot of others helped too. I should point out though that this was a project that was started by the journalism school, and even though it was, nobody told me a thing about what to write or how to write it. So what's in this book is pretty much my own writing. Every bit, well, not all of it, because there was some tinkering here and there with people who would find a slip or need another couple of words to add to a sentence or whatever. But the only serious editing that I got was from Will Norton, and he cut the chapter that I wrote on him just about in half, because he just would not let me make him into a star. What I cut out, and I'm not sure how well known it is, but he was on the board of directors for the Freedom Forum, went around the world setting up journalism programs in developing countries and doing a lot of other things, plus the work he has done with accreditation. This is landmark work, and it put Ole Miss, showed the flag in lots of places. And most of that did not make it into the book. But everything else in there is mine, pretty much everything. And any mistakes are certainly mine. I take responsibility for those. But there are a lot of heroes in the book. One of them is Dr. Robert Kyatt, who, as you all well know who live here, did a marvelous job with the university. When I was here, Robert Kyatt was my Sunday school teacher, and we were all young back in those days. He was a young law professor, but even then we knew that this was a man of considerable substance. And I guess it's not totally surprising what all he went on to do. Ed Meek. Ed was the university's PR man and a good friend socially when we knew him. He and Gail Denley introduced me to half the newspaper people in Mississippi, and to places like Doe's Eat Place down in Greenville. He was a good friend, but we didn't know then that Ed and Becky would go on to build a tremendously successful business. And even though he's become a millionaire many times over, Ed never lost his affection for Ole Miss or his belief in the journalism program. So he's one of the heroes. Another hero, and perhaps lesser known to many of you, was the chancellor when I was here, Dr. Porter Fortune. I talk about in the book what he did to help us get national accreditation, which was considerable. Less well known was the fact that he protected freedom of the student press. The Board of Trustees and Institutions of Higher Learning put pressure on him to muzzle the Daily Mississippian. No other student newspaper that I know about was ever read by so many important state officials as the DM. I mean, it really is out there. And they wanted Dr. Fortune to sit on it. And Dr. Fortune simply ignored it, the pressure. The next year, the Board of Trustees, and Ed may remember this, gave a direct order to all the chancellors of all the institutions in Mississippi to appoint an official censor. And Dr. Fortune laid his own job on the line, and he went directly to the board and said he was not about to appoint a censor for Ole Miss. And to everybody's astonishment, I guess even to his, the board backed down. About this time, a Midwestern university was establishing an award for a university administrator who was protecting student expression. We nominated Dr. Fortune for that award, and he was the first recipient of it. So he's in there. The book is not just about that period, though. Of course, it'd be remiss to make it that parochial. But there were a lot of other heroes. I mentioned some of them in the book. I'm sure I'm going to leave some names off here, but some that come to mind: Gail Denley, Curtis Wilkie, who's back there now, Stuart Bouillon, Mr. Magazine, Samir Husni, and these are just a few. And the students who came out of here, including Jim Autry and Greg Brock, Sidney Brower, who was editor of the Daily Mississippian during the Meredith admission crisis, and some of you were around here then, you know what all that was involved. She was nominated for a Pulitzer, by the way, for her editorials during that period. And Mary Lynn Kotz and Greg Brock, and Stephanie Saul, and Otis Sanford, and Ronnie Agnew, and so on. I'm sure Jerry could tell me 30 or 40 others that I don't have time to mention here, but those who are here now know, I hope they know, that they are, as it says in the Old Testament, drinking water from wells that were dug by others. Those who are here now are very fortunate. I think you could almost use the term blessed to be at this place at this time. The book is not a Valentine. It's not like that at all. There's some warts in there too. But it makes that point, I think. Those who are not here now, but who have been through this program, will read the book and they will know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. If you have a question or two, I'll be glad to try to field it. So, if I have a question. Yeah, Ed.
Let me add something. Of course, Porter Fortune was my boss and my dear friend. About that time, I had helped organize Philadelphia Guide.
Ah.
And we came up and pushed Hank Klevanoff and Hoddy Carter Jr. for an open meetings, open records law. Got it passed. The board ignored it, board of trustees. And they called Sigma Delta Chi to come to the board. Well, that was me. And I went to Dr. Fortune, I said, what I do, I'm the PR man for all this, I'm going to, he said, you go do your job. And I did speak to the board, and the board opened their records, not because of me, because I explained to them the importance of that, and we have open records and meetings with the board now, but they just ignored it for a while.
Well, I've got a little PS to that, because about that time when you were getting this stuff organized, I took it upon myself to go down to Jackson to visit the Hedermans. And I told Mr. Hederman, I don't remember which one it was now, but he was the senior guy. I said, you know, the Society of Professional Journalists is pushing for open meetings law, more openness in government, some other things. And he interrupted me and he said, I am embarrassed at some of the things that are being done in the name of journalism. And I was just stunned, and he said, who's the president of Sigma Delta Chi? And I said, Hod and Carter. And he said, I thought so. Now, those of you who were around in those days will appreciate the significance of that story, but anyway, the organization succeeded, and we had the conventions here, as I recall, a time or two. Other questions? Is that it? Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.